Okay, go ahead. Thank you. We welcome to our subcommittee meeting this afternoon. We will be going over the aid to community colleges. Ian Klein is the budget analyst, and after he finishes, we'll have Dr. Fielder and a whole host of people with him. So Ian, go ahead.
Great, I just need access to screen sharing, so bear with me for one moment. Okay. It looks like it should be up at this time. So what's good? Great. What you have before you is the analysis for the aid to community colleges budget. Funding for the community colleges in the state is primarily funded through formulas, with the most prominent being the Senator John A. Cade funding formula. Additional funding is also provided to support retirement payments for community college employees. As shown in the operating budget summary, the fiscal 2023 budget grows by $58.2 million or 15.7% from fiscal 22 to 2023. Turning to page 5, we can review the successful persister rates for the community colleges. Persister rates are the means by which we evaluate whether or not community college students are successfully meeting their goals. This includes only students who have attempted at least 18 credits in their first 2 years after enrolling at the college, and then who after 4 years are either still enrolled, have graduated, or have transferred. Those students would then be considered successful persisters. As you can see in Exhibit 1, the rate for Maryland has held fairly level at around 70% for these students over this evaluation period. Going to Exhibit 2 on page 6, you can see the persister rates broken down into 3 categories. Those being students who entered as college ready, students who required developmental courses and completed it, as well as students who did not complete their required developmental coursework. As you can see, the developmental completers persist at a rate that is just below the college ready students, though they don't graduate or transfer at quite the same rate. Meanwhile, developmental non-completers are far less successful at persisting. This emphasizes the importance of students completing developmental coursework. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows the successful persister rate by community college as composed of the 3 groups I just mentioned. As you can see, Baltimore City Community College has the lowest persister rate in the state, while Hartford Community College has a persister rate that is just over 80%. DLS asked the executive director of MAC to comment on the practices utilized by Anne Arundel Community College concerning their successful persister rates for developmental non-completers, and how those practices could potentially be adopted at other community colleges. Exhibit 4 on page 8 shows how community colleges are performing with their students who require developmental coursework. As shown, Baltimore City Community College had the highest portion of its students require developmental coursework at 95%. Frederick Community College clears its students through developmental coursework at the highest rate, with 88% of its students who needed that coursework completing it, while Anne Arundel Community College has by far the lowest rate, with 32% of its students completing their required developmental coursework. Exhibit 5 on page 9 shows the distribution of the different categories of students in the state. As is shown in the exhibit, just under 30% of students are considered non-persisters. The largest portion of this total are the developmental non-completers, and they represent 15% of the total cohort. Moving on to page 10, I'll speak on the graduation and transfer achievement gap for minority students in the state, which is shown in Exhibit 6. The gap is illustrated in the exhibit with both African American and Hispanic students falling below the all students category. It should be noted, however, since 2011 that all groups have experienced growth in 4-year graduation and transfer rates. Exhibits 7 and 8 on pages 11 and 12 look at enrollment at the community colleges. As seen in Exhibit 7 on page 11, total community college enrollment has steadily declined since 2011. In fact, total enrollment has decreased by 34.7% since 2011, falling to 97,086 students for the fall 2021 semester. Exhibit 8 on page 12 tells a similar story. There's been a steady decline in FTE's enrollment for in-county credit students, which peaked in 2012. As can be seen in the exhibit, there's been a marked decline in both in-county credit FTEs and non-credit FTEs as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic in both 2020 and 2021. The executive director should comment on the continued decline in enrollment, identifying potential marketing strategies or academic programming that could be utilized to attract students. The executive director should also comment on financial aid programming in the state, identifying how programs could be better utilized for or by the community's college student population. Moving to the financial impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the respective community colleges. For the fall 2020 semester, many community colleges reopened campuses and modified learning environments so that in-person instruction would be conducted in a socially distant structure, as well as limiting the number of students who could be in a classroom at one time. As shown in Exhibit 9 on page 13, the limiting of the number of students per class resulted in a reduction in tuition and fee revenue that totaled $28.5 million. When the Board of Public Works reduction of $36.3 million is included, along with continued lost auxiliary revenue, increased COVID-19 expenditures, and other lost revenues, the community college's fiscal 2021 shortfall totaled $96.6 million. Utilizing multiple federal and state relief funding sources and transfers from fund balances, the community colleges were able to eliminate that fiscal 2021 deficit. In fall 2021, which is fiscal 2022, the community colleges opened with a varied education delivery modality. However, most institutions reopened with all options approach, including in-person, hybrid, mostly online, and all online options available. Despite attempts to make education delivery as available as possible to the community colleges again experienced enrollment declines. As seen in Exhibit 10 on page 14, these declines and the associated financial losses from those decreases, along with the continued COVID-19 expenditures, are expected to result in a fiscal 2022 shortfall of $121.5 million. The respective community colleges again plan to utilize various HERF stimulus funding to offset these shortfalls. Exhibit 11 on page 15 provides the distribution of HERF spending by fiscal year. As shown in the exhibit, roughly $239 million in HERF spending will be allocated in fiscal 2022 alone. The executive director should comment on how most of the respective community colleges are planning to return to an operational structure in fiscal 2023 without the added assistance of federal emergency relief spending, should pandemic-related expenditures and impacts continue into the 22-23 academic year. The executive director should also discuss whether the continuing enrollment declines necessitate a rescaling of ongoing spending to align with lower revenues from tuition and fees. The discussion of the fiscal 2023 allowance is summarized on page 16, where Exhibit 12 shows the distribution for the different categories of funding. As is shown, funding for the CADE formula makes up just over 4/5 of the total funding, while retirement is the next highest portion at just under 15%. Exhibit 13 on page 17 provides a summary of how the declining enrollments at the community colleges, plus how the mandated statutory funding percentage increases, have impacted the grant awarded per full-time equivalent student. As is shown in the exhibit, the grant per FTE will increase tremendously from fiscal 2021 to the 2023 allowance, growing to $4,757 per FTE, or $1,853, or 64% over those 2 years alone. Exhibit 14 on the following page shows the changes in funding from fiscal 2022. The most significant change is found in the CADE formula, which increases by $59.3 million. And in total, there's a 15.7% increase in the aid to community colleges funding when compared to fiscal 2022. Most of the community colleges funding levels will increase in the fiscal 2023 allowance. However, Prince George's Community College funding level will remain at what was provided in fiscal 2022. This is a result of Prince George's County failing to meet maintenance of effort requirements, which stipulate that a county must allocate at least as much funding toward their community college as they had in the previous fiscal year. As is shown in the exhibit, had Prince George's County allocated the same funding level as the previous year, the funding provided to Prince George's Community College would have been $5.6 million greater than what was provided in the fiscal 2023 allowance. The executive director should comment on what actions are being taken by Prince George's County to address the maintenance of effort requirements for fiscal 2022. Moving to the issues, which begin on page 20, the one issue discussed focuses on tuition fees and student aid for community colleges. Exhibit 16 on page 20 illustrates that tuition and fees at Maryland community colleges have been growing. In 2021, the average tuition and fee level for Maryland community colleges was $4,826, which is over $1,000 greater than the national average. Should be noted, however, that in fiscal 2021, the growth in tuition and fees at Maryland community colleges declined when compared to the national average. We'll turn to the next page. You can see tuition and fee rates by community college. In Exhibit 17, the dotted line is the maximum federal Pell Grant amount that students can receive. You can see on that line, you can see based on where that line is in the graph, how much that would cover. In-county tuition would be covered for all community colleges in the state, but only at Baltimore City Community College, Hagerstown Community College, and Prince George's Community College would out-of-county tuition be met. Montgomery College in particular has a very high out-of-county tuition rate, which is more along the lines of the public four-year institutions in the state rather than the community colleges. Exhibit 18 on page 22 shows institutional aid and Pell Grant aid provided. Pell Grant aid is significantly higher than institutional aid, with $107.2 million being provided in fiscal 2021. This data is self-reported by the community colleges to the Maryland Association of Community Colleges and DLS. I should note that the decline in Pell Grant aid provided should not be especially surprising given the overall declines in community college enrollment that were just mentioned. Additionally, the institutional aid numbers do not include HERF emergency student financial assistance. Turning to page 23, Exhibit 19 shows the institutional awards by institution. Allegheny College provides the greatest institutional aid awards per 100 FTEs to its students at 69 per 100 FTEs. Prince George's Community College is giving the largest average amount per student, with institutional aid awards reaching just over $2,300. This may have to do with the fact that Prince George's has implemented a Promise Scholarship, but you can see in the chart that usage of the scholarship may not be very high, as it's reporting only 12 awards per 100 FTEs. The DLS recommended action is found on page 24, and that is to concur with the governor's allowance. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Would be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ian. Great job. Okay, we have Secretary Dr. Fielder. I'm going to let you go first.
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to compliment Mr. Klein. He does just an absolute outstanding job of pulling a lot of information and condensing it to the point that it becomes both understandable and digestible. It really is a tremendous job that the analysts do there. Mine simply is to concur with the governor's recommendations, as well as note how important the community colleges have been and continue to be for workforce development, especially in this pandemic and as we attempt to recover so many jobs that were lost and we're build back a workforce. So creating career paths, both credit and non-credit, is just tremendous. So that's all I would say. Thank you, unless you have any questions.
I have one question. In talking to like the university system, most of those people are saying that their enrollment is up to where it needs to be, and they could grow. But then when I talk to the community colleges, I hear that the enrollment is down. Do you know what the reason is for that? I mean, or am I mistaken on that?
No, you're correct on that. The enrollment at the 4 years declined less than the community colleges, which saw another decline. So you think about the decline over since 10 years now, 11 years is running about 35%. Some institutions more than that, some less. It's typically community colleges are counter-cyclical to unemployment. But the pandemic has been so disruptive of those that are at the lower scale of income, that are depending on, and they're working both part-time and going to school part-time. So the enrollment suffers. Most of the financial aid packages, as you know, federal and state, are designed for full-time credit students. So they're taking more than 12 credits. If you've got a family at home and a job and everything else, it's very difficult to get the full credit, 12 per semester. So there's some complications in the systems, the way they're working, that I think post-pandemic analysis will indicate need to be adjusted. I don't think there's not a quick fix, as the enrollment projections for even high school grads continues to go down for a few years. And the expectations of employers, including governmental employers, is higher education levels with more ability and analytical side. So we've got to make some adjustments in looking at academic programs, as well as how to support the community colleges.
Okay. Senator Zucker, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, with Ian Klein's analysis, quite a bit of attention was put on, financial aid and financial aid services. On page 25 of the analysis, it speaks about a 62.5% repeat audit findings for financial aid services coming out of the Maryland Higher Education Commission. So I just wanted to get a sense if those 5 repeat findings have been addressed? Thank you, Madam Chair.
I don't have that page in front of me. So do you mind giving me a little bit more detail, or I'll find that?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk offline. There's just been a number of repeat audit findings. There were 8 findings.
Yes. No,
Five repeat on financial, and they're all related to financial assistance. So I guess through the excellent analysis from Department of Legislative Services, they spoke about some of the shortfalls when it comes to awarding financial aid. So I was just trying to figure out if these repeat findings had been.
And that's a very good point. And some of the audits are repeat findings. So we've addressed that. And I think we're at half of the findings we've already corrected. We meet on a regular basis with DBM and with auditors. We actually have asked them to help us identify what can be done in terms of especially areas where you need a separation of duties between staff and you don't have enough staff to handle it. It's very difficult. So we're bumping a layer of review so that when one person does an award, it still gets reviewed by a separate and independent person. Some of the other things, of course, have to do with the MDCAP system, which is our computer system that needs to be, quite frankly, replaced. And it's needed to be replaced for a long time. So it is a drag on the system and to people. One of the things that didn't come up in the audit was the need for in-person conversations. And with the pandemic and switch to everything being remote, we moved very quickly. In the first 6 months of it, we had problems, and the people working at home did not have the capability on encrypted and protected voicemails for counseling. So we've got that fixed, and then we've got up to the point of 500 virtual meetings per week. So we've been able to remove all the backlog on emails and address that, but it still needs additional focus, yes.
Okay, Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just building off of Senator Zucker's question, Mr. Secretary, could you dig a little bit deeper into the MDCAP challenges? And is that your system for, what is that system for? Is it for all of MHEC's activities or just special activities? How long?
No, that's a very
problem? And then what do you need to fix it?
Okay, that's excellent. Our MDCAPS is the software program that supports and links to the FAFSA. So it links to federal, and then when a student enters it, it assigns a number, and the student is tracking in the system for all of our over 24 scholarship programs. And each time, as an example, there have been 7 new scholarship programs that have been added in since 2019. Each one of those changes in new scholarships requires a capital investment to improve and review the MDCAP system. So it's not robust enough to simply add another brick on top of the pile. You've got to go in and look at everything and redo things. So the expense each year has been growing. We have gone back to the Board of Public Works a couple times and got additional money to make improvements and patches, but that's what they are. They're patches. And patches on even the best tire don't work over time. So we are just very much aware that we're doing tremendous with what we have, but we've got to take a look at that for the whole state. We've looked at some of the other states, and the other states also have some issues with trying to find something that's a robust enough system that allows for new scholarships to be added. So each time that you add something, we'll say that has a limit on income, that software then looks at income across all the other programs. So we've got to make sure they don't interfere with each other. So it's a good question.
Thank you. And do you have an approximate number or in terms of what a complete overhaul or a better program might cost the state?
I think the last time we were looking at this, it was over 8 million. And so that's been probably 5 years ago.
Okay.
So it's not, an easy check to write, but the group that we have working with us now have been very good, very supportive, and very responsive, which has allowed us to do as much as we do.
Madam Chair, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, so is this also part of the reason or an inhibitor of connecting with the comptroller's office in terms of communicating family income or other checkpoints along the way?
Yes, it's an entire system that runs with those interfaces.
Okay. Thank you.
And when we switched over in 2021 to taking application electronically, just so that the committee has an idea, this last year we received 97,000 applications. So it's a lot for 16 people, even with a system that's running great.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a lot for us to think about.
Yes, it is. We have a lot to think about. Mr. Secretary, the only other person I have signed up here to speak would be Felicia Williams. Do one of you want to address the Prince George's County maintenance of effort issue?
I can simply address it. I would prefer that she did, because the information we know is that Prince George's County has to pass a piece of legislation. I understand from Dr. Williams that they have, and they'll move that forward. Then we'll be able to approve and request a supplemental from the governor's office. So I'm sure there's more detail that Dr. Williams would have.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and thank you for this opportunity to address this concern. As Secretary Fielder has shared, the county is in the process now of reconciling the maintenance of effort from FY22. The Council of the Whole has already agreed to approve it, and then it has moved from the Council of the Whole into the actual council proceedings. At this point, it is in its 3-week review for public hearing and should be eligible for approval on March 1st. So what we have agreed to do is to make sure that we notify Secretary Fielder's office on the expected approval that we would have on March 1st, and thereafter they would notify DMB, and the governor's office is prepared. So they have indicated to in their supplemental budget to restore the $5.6 million at that time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other comments from anyone else?
Thank you.
I think we're good. Thanks for being here today. Okay, next on the agenda this afternoon, we have the University of Baltimore. Sarah Baker is our analyst, and then Mr. Kurt Schmoke. I saw you in the audience there. Then we'll hear some remarks from you. Mr. Schmoke, I do have to say, I love watching your cat walk past you while you're sitting there.
Yes, I was going to comment to let you alert you to that wasn't me or
You weren't carrying a boa this afternoon or anything.
She settled down now.
Okay, Sarah, take it away.
Okay, let me just get my screen up here for y'all. So I'm going to start with Exhibit 1, which is first-time applications. And as you see, after receiving the highest number of applications for fall 2017, the number fell by almost 40% by 2019. Now, U-Bolt attributes this to the uncertainty around the continuation of its freshman program. For fall 2020, there was an increase not only in applications, but in the number of students who enrolled, which increased over 50% to 75 students. This reflects a more tailored approach to enrollment, focusing on students with higher academic credentials and those who want to pursue one of U-Bolt's niche programs. Exhibit 2 shows the trends in fall enrollment, which declined for an 8th year. Enrollment was down 15.5% from this past fall, with continuing students accounting for most of the downfall. And this has been an ongoing issue, with continuing students dropping over 50% since 2014. In addition, there is an ongoing decline in the number of transfer students, which since 2014 has dropped almost 60%. So all told, as shown on Exhibit 3, this has led to the loss of over half its undergraduate students since 2014. In addition, the graduate student enrollment has decreased about 30% since 2012, which was primarily driven by the decline in law school enrollment. So we asked the president to comment on the impact of the continued enrollment decline, especially the loss of half of its undergraduate population, and whether some of the decline reflects a change in student population focus and efforts to stem the decline. Exhibit 4 shows the retention rates, and the effects of the pandemic can be seen with the second year rate declining 4 percentage points to 72% with the 21 cohort. And while the third year rate has remained fairly stable, it will likely decline for the 21 cohort. Exhibit 5 shows the 6-year graduation rates. And overall, for all students, the rate has remained fairly stable, and the achievement gap narrowed with the 2016 cohort. Exhibit 6 compares the 6-year graduation rates of Pell and non-Pell first-time, full-time, and transfer students. And overall, the transfer students do graduate at a higher rate. And I would note that UBAL has seemed to make strides in graduating Pell students, with the graduating rate of first-time, full-time Pell students increasing from 26% to 38%. Turning to affordability, Exhibit 7 shows the cost of attendance versus the average net price. And overall, the average net price is almost 50% lower than the published price. Exhibit 8 shows spending on institutional aid. And as you see, spending has declined almost 50%, or by $2.3 million since 2015. And this reflects the budgetary challenges associated with the enrollment decline. UBAL is being more strategic in awarding aid, focusing on those with the greatest need and the high academic performers. Turning to the federal relief funds. There we go. As shown in Exhibit 10, UBAL received a total of $14.9 million, of which $6.1 million designated for financial aid. $11.6 million of these funds are expected to be expended this fiscal year, and there's $500,000 budgeted for 23. Exhibit 11 shows how the funds not designated for institutional aid were used. And as you can see, most of the funds, about $5.7 million, were used to cover tuition and revenue loss related to lower than expected enrollment. Exhibit 12 shows the budget changes by program areas between 21 and 2022. Overall expenditures in 4 program areas increased by $3.6 million. This is due to UBAL reducing expenditures in 21 in order to cover revenue loss and COVID-related expenses. Most of the income increase in 22 is related to filling vacant positions. The decrease of $4 million in operations and maintenance of plants is due to a fund transfer to plant funds in 21 in anticipation on spending related to the recently acquired U.S. Postal facility. In terms of revenue, in 21, UBAL reduced its original appropriation by $10.2 million, of which $7 million was related to tuition and fee revenues. So last June, the divisions conducted reviews of their operations, and $6.1 million of spending was ID that could be eliminated. It was $4.3 million in personnel, and the rest is in general administrative costs. And these reductions will be taken in 22 and 23. UBAL states this will allow them to absorb year-over-year budgeted reductions in tuition and fees and increase in expenditures without growing a structural deficit. Turning to Exhibit 13 in the proposed budget. After adjusting for salary increases in deficiency, state funding increases $8.8 million, or almost 20%. The general funds go up $9.3 million, and this is slightly offset by about $500,000 decline in half. Now, increases in the state funds include $4 million for the annualizations of the salary increases in 22 and for the 23 salary increases. There's $3.4 million to restore the 21 BPW reduction. There's $400,000 to expand operations of the Schaefer Center, and $125,000 that was mandated for the legal education success collaboration with UMB. Other unrestricted revenue only increased about $35,000, and this is related to tuition and fee. And this estimate was based on the planned 2% increase in in-state tuition, but is also based on projected 13.5% decrease in undergraduate enrollment. And I just note the restricted funds do decrease by $11.1 million, but this is due to the reduction of federal relief funds. Exhibit 14 shows the impact declining enrollment has had on the composition of revenues. And while state with state funds are now comprising a larger portion of revenues, increasing from 33% in 2018 to 45% in 23, with tuition and fees going from 57% to 46% of revenues. We asked the president to comment on if there is a break-even point in revenues, and if so, what will happen when enrollment drops below that break-even point. Exhibit 15 compares authorized and filled positions between 2019 and 2022. And during this time period, 61.3 positions were eliminated. Note the vacancy rate for student services increased from 11.1 to 20.3%. And this just highlights the challenges of hiring and retaining these frontline positions who work directly with the students in a time when their demands have been increasing. I have one issue, and this is regarding the status of the task force recommendation. So in February 2020, UBALT released a plan to realign the institutions, in which actions were centered around the 4 goals which are listed on the top of the page. Afterwards, the president asked the chancellor to clarify how the regions viewed UBALT within the rest of system. So the task force established was to provide recommendations about UBALT's future operations and mission. The recommendations focused on 8 key areas, including identity, enrollment management, and responsibility. And while progress has been made in implementing the recommendations, UBALT knows that the financial impact of continuing enrollment decline limits its available resources, and thereby it's going to take longer to reverse the downward trend. But they are strategically using the resources that they do have to invest in priority projects, such as currently they are developing a new website. UBALT also acknowledges the lack of consistent leadership in enrollment management is also part of the reason they have not been able to reverse the downward trend. We asked the president to comment on the challenges to implementing the task force recommendations, the impact of the pandemic, and if it resulted in changes to the academic and business models. And finally, the recommendations, which is to see the system overview for system-wide recommendations. And that concludes my presentation.
Thanks, Sarah. Excellent job as always.
Thank you.
Mr. Schmoke.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. And I first of all want to thank Sarah Baker again for a very thorough and very efficient review of the University of Baltimore situation. I'm joined today by our Provost, Catherine Anderson, our Vice President for Administration and Finance, Beth Amiot, and Director of our Intergovernmental Relations Program, Suzanne Tabor. I first of all wanted to note that, as you know, we have submitted written responses to the questions raised by our analysts. I wanted to touch upon a few matters. We have been going through a period of some transition, but as I mentioned to you, Senator King, when I met, the good news actually outweighs the bad news. We have, over the past few years, seen an improvement in the admission in the law school, which had in the 2014-15 period taken a really steep decline, similar to what was happening nationally with law schools that saw over 33% reduction in, oh, excuse me, the cat just bit me, 33% reduction in applications. But the law school has come back very strong, and because they have such an impact on overall university finances, that made has had a huge impact. I would point out that the chart that you saw in the community college presentation, Mr. Klein's first chart that showed that decline, really had a tremendous impact on our operations, because, as you know, the University of Baltimore serves primarily the older student population, the earners and learners. Over 70% of our undergraduates are community college graduates or transfers. So that huge decline in those attending community college is reflected a great deal in what the decline that we have seen over the past few years. But what are we doing to make the change? Many things. First of all, we have stabilized that Office of Enrollment Management, which had gone through a lot of changes. We have a new vice president for enrollment management who comes from two universities that are very similar in their population to us, Fayetteville State and one of the colleges of the University of Hawaii. She's built a great team. Of course, they have a lot of challenges with the pandemic, but we have a really strong a leader there and a great team. We also have had a wonderful relationship with the Community College of Baltimore County. And Dr. Curtinitis and I have been working on this, a dual enrollment plan that both of our faculties are reviewing, and we intend to implement it. We think the two of us believe that if successfully implemented, that would lead to an increase of about 300 students from the Community College of Baltimore County coming to the University of Baltimore. That's, we think, is very important. We have recently also received a designation from the federal government as a PBI, predominantly Black institution. That designation is for universities that have, 40% African American, at least 40% African American population, 50% low income students or first generation students. And from that designation, now we have received a grant, but we also know that there is in the President Biden's budget, there's increased funding for PBIs included without any decrease to what's going to the HBCUs around the country. So we're hopeful that will lead to a steady new stream of income for us. And finally, on the admission side, the Parsons Program, which I think I've explained, but just briefly, one of our alums, Bob Parsons, who is the founder of the company GoDaddy, has been a very generous contributor to the university. And he has contributed a fund for us. It's over $5 million that will allow us to close the gap for a person graduating from community college who comes to the University of Baltimore and is Pell eligible. The funds from the Parsons Scholarship will close the gap between the Pell Grant and our tuition. So that gap is about $2,500 now, but to be able to close that gap, I think is just wonderful, and will help us a great deal in attracting graduates. It's for graduates of community college. So those things are really helping us to be optimistic, to look forward to the improvement in our overall enrollment picture. And of course, we appreciate what's been proposed in the governor's budget. And we, obviously very supportive, and particularly pleased that some money is designated for our Schaefer Center of Public Policy. Schaefer Center has just done an outstanding job in helping to train public servants around at state and local level, and we'll be able to increase that. So I recognize that there are challenges. I do believe that some of our challenges in the past few years are attributed to an overhang. It was like a cloud on our head, the coalition lawsuit, because in that lawsuit, if you recall, a number of the remedies that were proposed were taking parts of UB and moving it to other institutions. So I actually had to deal with people wondering whether the University of Baltimore was going to be around in the future. That cloud has been lifted. I appreciate very much the General Assembly and the governor's response to that, the legislation that you all approved to settle that case, removed a huge cloud from us. So that's why all those things, not being Pollyannish, I do believe that together they will help us to move forward and have a very positive outcome over the next few years.
Good to hear. Senator Alfred.
Thank you, Madam Chair. President Schmook, I just want to say thank you for your stewardship and particularly your focus on transfer students. I think that is absolutely UB's kind of niche, and I think you're doing an incredible job at that. I also, Madam Chair, would be remiss if I didn't tell folks that both President Schmook and his cat are my constituents. And so my question, since I have to ask a question, would be, what is your cat's name, Dr. Schmook?
This happens to be Artemis that gave me that little nibble there. That's
very well named, very well named. Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I have a few more speakers on my list here. First one is Mary Beth. Is it Emiot?
Emiot.
Would you like to speak?
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I was here mainly to support President Schmook.
Okay, I thought you
So I have
might.
no additional comments.
Okay, Suzanne Tabor.
The same. I was just here to support President Schmook today.
Okay. Catherine Anderson. Same.
Same, happy to answer questions if there are, but here for support.
Okay, and Jody Helsel. Everybody's had a chance. Okay, any other questions from committee members? Senator Alfred, do you still? Okay. All right. Well, you're going to get off easy here this afternoon.
Thank you. And let me go deal with my cat now. Thank you very much.
This working from home is hard. I have a dog that every time I get on a Zoom call picks up his toy and squeaks it. Just keeps walking around squeaking it. So, all right. Thank you all very much.
Great. Thank you.